Good morning, everyone. I won't compete. This reading about the redeeming light, really in essence, the light that is the divine, is so replete throughout all of history with every great saint and sage, and in fact every poet and writer, and with stories of the light that I was tempted for a little while last night to just stand up and tell a lot of them, but I'm going to try and limit myself. The reading itself has two, actually, really wonderful stories in it. Swamiji just alludes to the second one, but I know that story, where at the end of the reading he says, "Where my light shines, no darkness can dwell." There was a man, this is a true story, who had diabetes and who was extremely ill and was told that he had 3 months to live. And he felt if he was just going to live for 3 months that he really wanted to dive deep into meditation. So he started meditating and slowly over time increased his meditation. And his only prayer throughout all of meditation was asking God to please come into his, what he called, broken temple. And he prayed and he prayed and he meditated. After 3 years, he was up to meditating 18 hours a day. And at some point when he was reciting that prayer, he saw a great light, and then he was healed. He felt God come into him. And he said to God, "But I never asked you to heal me." And God said to him, where my light is, no darkness can dwell. It's a beautiful story. The light didn't care about the illness. The light didn't care about anything. Just such a perfect example of the light shining, and the darkness is unable to really exist within that. Very much like the chant that was being chanted this morning. Who is in my temple? All the doors do open themselves. All the lights do light themselves. Dark bird, fly away. Darkness like the dark bird, fly away. The light is just there. If we can awaken to it, this is a light that shines from within all of us. And this other beautiful story of Master when he was only 8 years old, and his mother's knowing that she could pray for a healing. Lahiri Mahashaya was no longer even in his body when this story happened. So it was his picture, it was his energy. And she said to Master, just mentally call on Lahiri Mahashaya, knowing that he was too weak to do anything else. And even at that thought, even invoking the presence of the divine. And again, Master said the room was filled with a great light. And it was only when his mother said, "Thank you, Master," she was putting her head against the picture, "Thank you for allowing your light to heal my son." So we keep hearing of all these references to the light, even in these stories. As many of you know, I'm a physician, and for many years practiced a lot of medicine, and it just so happened that I practiced both nursing and then medicine in a way that I was around for many resuscitations, and some of those stories you've heard, and I'm not going to tell any of them today. But what was common to the 4 times in my life that I was present where somebody was resuscitated, this is long before I knew anything that I know about now. Many of these stories happened when I was a nurse from the time I was 18 until I was 32. I just didn't know really anything about this spiritual path. But what I did notice in every one of these stories, and what we all know now, because now it's just common, there are so many stories of near-death experiences, there's books that are written, there's movies that are written, It's not at all uncommon to hear about it. In those days, it was very uncommon. But every one of these people, these 4 people, every one of them, but 4 felt like a big number, came back and spoke about what we now have all heard about many times, going through a tunnel and being drawn towards the light. Now, in my experience, 2 of those people were not thrilled with their experience. It's not like they said, oh, I just wanted to go to the light. I didn't ever want to come back. 2 of them subsequently told me that. But in all 4 of the instances, they described this light as being so welcoming, so warm, so embracing. They felt like they were totally seen, but without any judgment. It's a very interesting thing. I remember the second time I was in that situation with someone. See, one experience, you don't know what to make of it. The first time I wondered if I wasn't crazy. But the second time you start realizing there are some common themes here. And by the third and the fourth, it was dawning on me something very real is happening. And these were profound experiences for all of these people who went through them. And now we've read about them. There's this delightful book I've been hearing about for a long time. But last week I finally picked it up and I read it in a night. And I highly recommend it. It's like that. It's one night's reading. It's called Heaven is for Real. Maybe many of you have already read it. But it's a story of a pastor and his wife and their 3.5-year-old son. And the 3.5-year-old son gets extremely ill. And the diagnosis is missed for a couple of weeks, even though he's in the hospital, even though the idea of a ruptured appendix was suggested to the doctors. They just didn't think the picture fit that bill. And anyway, the end of the story is he did have a ruptured appendix and he did go through a couple of surgeries. When they finally took him home, after many weeks, he was extremely ill. And for much of the time, the doctors and the nurses did not think he would live. This is a little 3.5-year-old. He starts speaking to his mother and his father about the time when he went to heaven during this time and he saw Jesus. And he speaks about it all the time, very matter-of-factly. And here's his father, who's a pastor in some Protestant church. I forget what it was. So he knows all the right questions to ask him, and throughout the book, he's asking him all of these questions. So at one point, the little boy, whose name I think is Colton, but I'm forgetting, is telling his father how big God is and what a big chair he had to sit in heaven, but that Jesus was there too. And he said, I always sat in Jesus' lap. I mean, it's very adorable, but he just would say it out of nowhere. And so his father asked him, what side of God did Jesus sit on? Do you remember? He said, oh, of course, he sat on his right side. Of course, the father's going back with everything he knows about the Bible. And the little boy said, well, there was another chair. And his father said, who do you think the chair was for? And he goes, Dad, it was for Gabriel. Just like, what is the matter with you? You're supposed to be a pastor. But what's interesting is as he's telling him this story, this is well into the book, the father says to him, he's telling them that he met his grandfather there, who died before he was born. But he's talking about Pop, and he knows him perfectly well, and it's very clear to the pastor and his wife that he actually met Pop. He knows things about Pop nobody would know, never mind a 3.5-year-old. And his father says to him, well, late at night when it got dark and you and Pop went home, what did you do then? And he says, Dad, it never gets dark in heaven. Whoever told you that? And his father keeps going and said, well, it must get dark. And Colton looks at his father. He said, it never gets dark. He said, God and Jesus are pure light. It's always bright in heaven. It's so dear, to hear these remarkable stories. the one thing that everybody talks about with this light and with these experiences of the light is how it changes their life. I had something happen to me many years ago. I've always been reluctant to share this story, but something came up in a group that we were having a week ago, and I shared it, and I'm just feeling inclined to do that now, bearing in mind that it happened 37 years ago and it's never happened since. But I was a student at UCSD, and I went to a conference there. And at this conference was Swami Satchidananda, who was a really, well, I can't really say what he was spiritually, because how would I know? But he was a very highly evolved man, and he was revered as a saint, not just in India, but throughout the world. And he was, the keynote speaker doesn't quite say it, he sort of was the conference. And there was another woman there, Patricia's son, who I never saw again after that. But they were both very high beings. And I had a profound experience at that conference that I did not understand. I had no idea what it meant. This part, many of you have heard me say, that I told my husband at the time, I don't know what these words that I'm about to say to you mean, but my life is different now than it was going to be. And I couldn't say anything more about it. But Swami Satchidananda was leading a 4-day retreat after that, and we just decided to go. So we just canceled life, and we went to this retreat. And I came out of that retreat in a different world. That's all I can say. I still don't have words for it. For 3 months to the day, literally to the day, I saw nothing but love and light in people. I was walking around the campus of UCSD completely in love with everybody. I was almost a danger to myself and others. I was just in another world. 3 months to the day, I came out of it. And there I was, left with myself. It was so discouraging. I was so disappointed. I struggled for weeks to get back to that place, but I couldn't. And if I tell the truth, I really never have. Not like that. I felt like God was saying to me, here's what it could be. Do your work. This is what's out there. It's out there. You can always have it. You just have to do the work to get back there. The image that I had is of a parent who wants their child to take their first few steps, and they stand on the other side of the room with a piece of candy. And the kid finally gets up and gets the candy. And I feel like I got the candy, I tasted it, gone. 37 years later, here I am. But I will say this about that experience. It totally changed my life. It absolutely gave direction in a way that I could never have known, that I would never have known, I mean, unless there was some other act of grace, because once there's any experience, and this is what we hear over and over and over through all of these near-death experiences, through every saint, as I said earlier, that once you know for sure that really what exists in the world is pure light. Now, we can't hold on to it and see it that way. In Autobiography of a Yogi, there's a chapter called The Law of Miracles. And I am not going to say much about the chapter because, quite frankly, I cannot. It's absolutely mind-blowing to me that Yogananda wrote this chapter. It's all about light. It's about light being the essence of all that is, being really the essence of reality. And he explains, as I think only a physicist could understand, or at least let me say I couldn't, and I have no idea what's happened in science since that time. But I know that a couple of the things that he says in that chapter continue to be the truth. One is that he says that light is the most subtle form of manifestation and the purest form of manifestation, that even sound needs medium to be able to express itself. Light needs nothing. Light is the most basic, essential thing that exists. And from that light, everything else is made manifest. So that there's one light. And he goes on to say that in this universe that is in a constant state of change and flux, that light is the only thing, the speed of light, the velocity of light, is the only thing in the universe that's constant. Now, after that, he loses me, except to say that he is showing us who the great saints of the world are, these people who see the universe as a mass of undifferentiated light. We see it as differentiated matter because we can't see it as it really is, which does not mean that it doesn't exist. In that same chapter, Master tells this really profound story, and that I know most of you have read, but he's meditating. It's 1915, World War I is going on, and he's meditating up in his room. And in that meditation, he suddenly finds himself in the body of a captain who's commanding a warship. And he's there right at the moment that a shell comes, or a missile, and hits the ship, and the ship explodes. This is what he's living right now. He's the captain. And he and a couple of other men who lived dive into the water, and they swim to shore. And he's very dramatic in the telling of this, and he says he gets to shore, and just when he thinks he's made it, a bullet hits him in his chest. And he realizes in that moment that he's dying. So he literally gets ready to die when he finds himself sitting in the lotus pose upstairs in his meditation room. And he said, I was so happy to be alive, and I was gasping for breath. I mean, it's very dramatic when just like that, he's back in the body of the captain on the shore. And then finally, he says to God, talk to me. Am I dead or am I alive? What is happening? And God answers him and says, in this world of light, what is the difference between life and death? And he had just given him this experience of being dead in one moment, very much alive in the next. And Master said, I've had many visions. He said, not one of them has been as, he didn't use the word compelling, but as eye-opening, whatever word he used, as this one. He said, it taught me so much right then in that instant. Now, of course, Master was born a master. He probably didn't really have to learn this, but for our sake, he would write like this, I guess. He said, in that instant, I understood everything about Maya, or delusion, the delusion. So we see, in essence, by God's will, this world was manifested in light, because that's all that existed, was pure light. But by God's will, it was manifested as we see it, with light and dark, because we, living through our ego consciousness, we live in a state of duality, which we've talked about many times. In this case, light and dark, death or alive. We always talk about it, good, bad, right, wrong, likes, dislikes. It's the nature of the human condition. But by our own will, we could change that. We could decide to move closer to the light. In fact, it is, in essence, our assignment in this life. It's the only thing we're here to do, is to start making choices to live in terms of the light rather than darkness. Now, darkness can be a tricky word because it's easy to say, oh, I'm not dark. I'm not a dark person. But darkness means the way our ego clouds our vision, because divine light is our soul reality. That's what is. But living in our ego consciousness, it's really, in essence, like closing the eyes of the soul. We can no longer see that light. Our eyes are closed. we need to make choices to open our eyes. And it's not simple, because life gives us so many reasons to continue to think that things are as we see them. Some of you know that one of my brothers has been really quite ill, actually a lot of his adult life, but particularly in this last life, with very serious illnesses. He's had this massive chest cancer that's spread into all of his nodes, and because they needed to treat him a certain way, they had to amputate one of his legs for his lung that was infected, and they knew it would never heal. And you hear, I don't need to give you any more gory details. I think that's probably quite enough. But he's been sick, and he's been quite sick. And he's gone through a lot, one complication after another. But when I went to see him in April or May, whenever I was there, I took a risk with him. And I said to him, you know how much I love you. I've always loved you. I always will love you. And I realized this could actually hurt you, but I realized there's a chance that it could help you so much that I'm going to share this with you. You actually have a choice about how you live now. You are choosing to be depressed. You are choosing to stay at home. You have chosen for a year since the surgery to not work. Those are choices that you've made. There are people who only have one leg who work. There are people who have no legs who work. There are people who wake up every day and choose to experience and affirm gratitude for what they have. Look at you. You had a massive lung cancer a year ago. You are alive. There is no evidence of your cancer today. You have 4 children who adore you, who have gone through this with you. You have a sister who's been here through every minute of it. You could be celebrating, but you're not. You're choosing to wait until the circumstances of your life become something that you think they should become. God only knows what that is. Will it ever get perfect? And then you'll be happy. But Rick, you're 62 years old. You should really be doing this now. You could do it so easily. Well, it was a failed experiment. In fact, he got very mad at me. And he did it, and I don't want to be glib about it, by feeling there's no way in the world you could understand what I'm going through. I've heard that so many times in my life. If I get really honest, I've probably said that too many times in my life, thinking that what we're going through is so different that it dictates how we have to respond. That is never true. It is never the truth. We could always choose to be positive. We could always choose to see what is right and good and whole. And every time we make that choice, it gets easier and easier and easier to see the light in all that is. Most of us can't just open our eyes and see the world that way now. But every time we make a right decision, every time we let in a little light, it changes the color of everything around us. Then we have a whole new place that we're starting from. It dramatically changes our universe. But starting is not easy. The thought that just comes to me is what happens when we've lived in darkness for a long time. You know, there are people who have been kept in isolation in dark cells, or for other reasons have been in darkness for months, and it takes weeks till they can fully open their eyes. Or people who have eye surgery. Why? Because when we live in the darkness, any darkness, light is painful. That's the simple truth. We can only tolerate so much light. And then we find ways to say, but you don't understand. I have to do this time. I have every reason in the world to be upset with this person, to be judgmental of that, to be blaming of this person. And it doesn't work that way. A couple weeks ago, I think, I told a story here, but I want to make it general. About a year and a half ago, I was, or maybe more now, invited to become the manager of this church, and most of you know I accepted that role joyfully. But it started dawning on me after I was in that role that there were a lot of people who were part of this congregation, which I had always considered my congregation long before I had that particular title, who I had avoided. Just different people. You know, our personalities didn't work. And I realized that I couldn't carry that anymore. So I started reaching out to all of these people, one by one by one. A tea here, a visit there, a lunch here. People that I just had nothing to do with, many of whom I had a judgment about. Sometimes it wasn't even a bad judgment, it's just what it was. I decided I wanted to feel as connected as I could, as much of an open door as I could be to as many people in the church as I could be there for. And to the person, as I went out and met with them, having changed my mind, having opened my eyes, I found them to be charming, absolutely charming. I'm telling you, to the person. Now, maybe somebody's going to stump me down the road. I don't know. But it is so beholden upon us to open our eyes and to choose which way to go. There's a lovely line from Harry Potter where he says, we're all made up of lightness and darkness. All that matters is which part of ourselves we decide to work on, because that is who we are. That choice that we make, will I turn towards the light? You know this discussion that's always impossible to have about free will? It's so hard. There's so many questions about it. Notice I'm bringing it up just a couple minutes before I sit down because I'm not broaching that topic. But it did dawn on me a couple of weeks ago that really, in essence, we could all think of free will as just exactly this. Which way do I choose to turn in life? All the time, not only when the going gets tough, because we have to practice when it's easy. Do I keep turning in the direction of I can, I will, it's good, I see it? Or do we turn in the direction of I can't, you don't understand, it's too hard? And that, if we started exercising our free will in just that way, every one of us could make enormous spiritual progress in this life. Enormous. Masters, I'm trying to think of a quote of Masters. It was so perfect right then, that men are, I can't think of the quote, but basically he says, we have an innumerable number of ways to delude ourselves. Of course, he said it in words. Most of you probably know the quote much better than I just said it. It's just endless. And he was sort of adorable about it, but it's true. He said, when somebody asked him why he came here, he said, I came to show you who and what you really are. And what he has shown us over and over and over through all of his stories, through all of how he lived his life, through these chapters that he's written in AY, through in so many ways, is that we are that pure light. Even if we just hold that thought, if we just stay with the thought, long before we can see it, we've already moved this much closer to it. Every time we hold that thought up, I am pure light. Everybody that I see, everything that I see, is just a different manifestation of pure light. All that's in the way of my seeing that is me. Let me move a little closer to it, moment by moment by moment. Then we get to let Master know that we heard him when he said that, and we're doing everything we can do to realize the truth of our soul reality and to hear what he's trying to tell us about who and what we really are.